on this slide here. So, citizen engagement with data processes can be at different multiple stages of the data value chain, or also in a circular process where analyzed data may be used to inform or evaluate further action. Yes. So how is CGD beneficial? It helps to improve the accuracy of official statistical data, as citizens can provide more accurate and reliable data and contextual information that may be useful. It increases government accountability. It makes it difficult for governments to hide critical information from the citizens. And it also creates a greater sense of ownership for citizens and helps to build trust, as it allows a more coordinated and straightforward approach towards future data collection efforts. Next slide, please. So the different methods of citizen engagement with data, there are many different methods, including data collection efforts such as community mapping or infographics, visualization such as diagrams, data analysis, a citizen can work with, for example, experts to help analyze data or identify patterns, and also they can play a role in disseminating the findings and the data, for example, through their social media platforms. And finally, CGD can also be used to monitor public policy and SDGs, as it can be used to fill in gaps in the knowledge by providing valuable contextual information or information about the local realities to really help supplement policy and decision making. At a global level, CGD can inform international organizations about region-specific problems to help them develop targeted interventions. In order to link CGD to SDG monitoring, multiple data sources should be aggregated and existing infrastructure should be modified to include the use of CGD. And it can also aid in combining qualitative and quantitative data to improve reliability and increase effectiveness of indicator monitoring. So secondly, the methodology. So for the research design, the first stage of research was a comprehensive literature review of the different national experiences of CGD. We then interviewed NSOs and CSOs separately from Vietnam, Colombia, and Kenya, and also carried out joint interviews using pre-prepared questionnaires. Questions were geared towards each country's experiences with CGD, the lessons they learned, and future plans for collaboration. From the interview notes, a qualitative case study or thematic analysis was then carried out, and the common themes were identified, and the information then synthesized to represent the important outcomes of this project. So for the sample selection, the samples were selected through previously known organizations from the UN network. The three chosen countries were Vietnam, Colombia, and Kenya, and they were chosen because they were determined to have different levels of citizen engagement in their certain experiences so far. We also completed an ethics review from LSE to ensure the research methods were approved by the LSE board, and prior to interviews, consent forms were also sent to respondents to inform them how their data will be used and to ensure their confidentiality and privacy. So the first major limitation of our study comes from the nature of the qualitative analysis, as obviously it is very subjective and therefore susceptible to researcher bias and various interpretations of the data collected. Methodological limitations mainly surrounded the interview process. So we did the interviews online, and we did them with individuals from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So some of the information may have got lost in translation or due to technical issues. And finally, due to the time constraints of this project, we only managed to interview 3 countries. Interviewing more would have made the data more accurate and reliable, and really improved our project.
Yeah, so going on next, I'd like to kick us off with Vietnam for our country case studies. So for the Vietnam case studies, we interviewed the General Statistics Office, which is the National Statistics Office in Vietnam, and it is organizationally located under the Ministry of Planning and Investment. It conducts various statistical activities for Vietnam, and the MSD, the Management and Sustainable Development Institute, which is an NGO in Vietnam, and it collaborates with over 400 other CSOs and actually works as a sort of central point for collaboration for many of these entities. MSD is also leading the Leave No One Behind initiative from the Vietnam side and is leading the Child's Rights Governance Network. So to kick us off, we wanted to discuss each of these countries through several selected questions in order to kind of hone in on the data that we collected. So the first question would be, what is the current state of citizens' engagement in the data value chain in the selected case studies? So Vietnam was specifically chosen as a country with nascent stages of utilizing citizens-generated data and nascent stages of citizens' engagement. While both organizations do engage in the data value chain and all of its aspects, they do so separately and through several different avenues. So MSD really focuses on vulnerable populations such as children, individuals with disability, LGBTQ+ community, and indigenous populations. Also, it does a lot to monitor sustainable development goals and identify metrics and various indicators to help understand the achievement of these goals and actually engage citizens to understand these metrics. The GSO has also some limited experience working with citizens, although it does not use citizens-generated data. It more so conducts surveys and uses citizen feedback in order to understand how various policies, particularly policies during COVID-19, have been received and implemented through working with labor unions and also conducting pulse surveys with the media. So the second question that we're going to be addressing is what is the current extent and type of collaboration between the GSO and NSO? So as we already mentioned, this is a pretty new collaboration and it's quite limited at the current time. In fact, both respondents and representatives from the organizations mentioned that the UN and UNSD specifically was a prime method of collaboration between the two. The two respondents were aware of each other, but the two organizations have not formally worked together. MSD has worked with other ministries of the Vietnamese government, but not the GSO directly. And likewise, the GSO hopes to find ways to collaborate with MSD, but has not currently done so. A really notable future initiative is that actually MSD will be collaborating with the International Civil Service Commission, the UNSD, and the GSO, and will be involved in this too, to actually create a toolkit for citizens-generated data in Vietnam. And just, this is a really important initiative for collaboration that is currently in the works. And just kind of to wrap up Vietnam, we wanted to discuss the challenges that are faced by GSOs and CSOs when it comes to both engaging citizens in the data value chain, but also creating citizen-generated data. So first and foremost, the respondents did note that there's currently a lack of formal mechanisms to actually collaborate, as in more of an institutional framework. So there is a lot of desire to collaborate. There's a lot of understanding that citizens-generated data is valuable, but in the sense of how to actually utilize data from the CSO and collaborate with the CSO, those mechanisms are simply not in place right now. Likewise, a major area of interest is also aligning data quality assurance standards. The GSO did note that while they would love to collaborate with the CSO, currently the data provided by the CSO does not meet the same standards and also may not have the desired sample size in order to actually be formally utilized in national statistics, data dissemination and analysis. Likewise, there have been some limitations to the funding after COVID-19 to the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is also something that needs to be considered, in addition to resources in the sense of training and actual funds to fund collaboration and citizens engagement in the future. Likewise, trust is also a major component of this collaboration, and there was a lot of individual trust expressed throughout the interviews, which is really great, but of course there needs to be more collaborative organizational trust being built. Particularly the CSO did mention that there have been some questions about transparency when it comes from the side of the Vietnamese government and how data is currently being used and presented. So that is all for Vietnam. I pass off to my colleague.
So we were very fortunate enough to have Colombia on board as well. So Colombia as a country has recognized the importance of citizen engagement in data value chains and has implemented various initiatives to promote it. So, for example, one of the biggest examples is the National Open Data Policy data plan that they have already in place. So the organizations that we were able to get in touch with was one NSO and two CSOs. The NSO that we had was DANE, which is the National Administrative Department of Statistics, who is responsible for planning, compilation, analysis, and dissemination of official statistics of Colombia. They have collaborated with various organizations to produce statistical notes on the progress of the SDGs in Colombia. And one of the examples that we got was a Facebook project, which was a really nice insight into the working of how the nations work in statistics and dissemination of data. So, for example, DANE, along with National Statistical System, which was known as the SEN, and they've been able to put in place the generic statistical business process model. And this has paved way for successful execution of projects across different parts of the data value chain. And like I said, the Facebook data would be an example of the same. So coming to the next one, the CSOs that we had were FLIP and COM. So FLIP, as you can see, is a non-profit organization originally created to protect threatened journalists in Colombia. Now they works and defends and promotes the freedom of expression and right to access public information. The CONG, or the Colombian Confederation of Non-Governmental Organization, is an umbrella organization. They lead, promote, and articulate actions to strengthen value offer of NGOs and nonprofit entities. They also have many civil society organizations under their umbrella. So trying to answer the question, the first one, so what's the current state of citizens' engagement and data value chain? So like I said, Colombia is very forward in this entire process. So for the detection and analysis stage of the data, they've collaborated with various organizations, both NGOs and CSOs, to obtain statistical information needed from users and different interest groups. The needs collected through different channels are consolidated through an instrument that is a part of the entity's management system. Then in the collection and data protection, they actively have developed exercises to measure various SDGs, and one of them is active collaboration with a lot of organizations, primarily the CSOs. In dissemination, actively collaborates with CSOs and other organizations to produce statistical notes on progress of the SDGs in Colombia, and these are all published on their formal platforms, which is available to the citizens as well, so which is a really good step towards it. And the indicator acceleration work, they have meetings with FLIP to gather information that allows the estimation of indicators for the SDGs. Now, trying to answer the second question, it is quite similar and very overlapping because of how farther they are in this process. So there's a lot of collaboration at almost every stage of the data value chain. However, the most collaboration can be seen in the process of data collection, where they collaborate with the CSOs because they're on ground and they're more connected to the population there. So it is easier to collect data from the CSOs. So that is one of the examples that we've already talked about, where they collaborated with the COM. However, there's ample room for improvement in the current collaboration, and it was quite evident when we interviewed both the organizations. Now, like every other organization that we've had a conversation with, there are certain limitations to Colombia as well. The challenge is mainly very similar to the other organizations as well. There's regarding collaboration between CSOs and NSOs. In Colombia, the interviews highlighted issues with dialogue and mistrust. And there are communication barriers due to suspicion and mistrust as well. FLIP, for example, shares the data with NSOs, but at times the entity is unsure of who the data is shared with. So that is the kind of, that is what we saw over the interviews. And there are also concerns about the private sector and government is using what they're doing with the data that these CSOs and NGOs are collected and being forwarded onwards. So to overcome this issue, FLIP does shadow reports so that they can see where the data is going. Other than that, similarly, the NSO also highlighted that civil society distrusts official information, which makes it harder to conduct joint projects. So there's an active barrier in collaboration, recognition, trust, communication, transparency, and one of the major is cultural and language barriers across the regions. So now I forward it to my colleague here, who will be doing Kenya.
We also interviewed Kenya. And we interviewed 4 CSOs and 1 NSO. So the NSO is the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics, which is the official statistical agency of the government of Kenya and is responsible for the collection, analysis, and dissemination of official statistics on economic, social, and demographic trends in the country. To begin with, one of the CSOs was ILEPA, which works around rights and governance, environment and climate change, research and documentation, livelihood support, and capacity building for indigenous communities. We also interviewed Goods, which focuses on building economic justice, climate change awareness, political participation, and women's leadership in public life. We also interviewed VSO, which is an international organization working in both Africa and Asia, focusing on education, resilient livelihoods for youth, women, and persons with disabilities, sexual reproductive health, and maternal and child health. And finally, we interviewed the SDG Kenya Forum, which acts as a convener of all the CSOs, training and capacity building, and on citizen-generated data. So with what is the current state of citizens' engagement and data value chain in the selected case study? So for Kenya, I would say it was very advanced, with Kenya recognizing the importance of citizen engagement and implementing various initiatives to promote it. So the NSO works with CSOs to collect data at the community level, and especially since 2020, to use CGD in their own national reports, which is quite advanced. There's also KNBS, which also made an assurance framework through KESQAF, which helped with cohesion. Finally, the Kenya Forum was mainly focused on tackling and reviewing SDG 6, 7, 9, 11, and 17, with the rest of the CSOs focusing mainly on vulnerable populations. So once again, with collaboration, I would argue there was a fair amount of collaboration and trust in comparison to the other countries. It was mainly focused around a focus group, and they also had this common framework and different partners. So having a CGD standard and a common framework through the QAF really helped with common methodology, providing an avenue for collaboration. Also, this really helped CGD being accepted and used. There was also a forum for discussion, which was established to increase the flow of communication. And it's also important to highlight the role of partners in capacity building, but also in providing an avenue for more further collaboration. So regarding the challenges, there are sensitive topics. For example, the VSO interviewed asking about households with children with disabilities, and in certain coastal areas, this created pushback. So citizens did not want to contribute. There was also cultural differences. So for example, ILEPA worked with indigenous communities, and the Maasai, they don't answer questions as a given, they more reply in stories, meaning that the research design had to be altered. Moreover, certain questions such as how many children do you have? The Maasai don't really count children. So again, the framework the research design had to be adapted. There's also gender differences, which affects analysis, collection, and dissemination of data. There's also data fatigue with ILEPA again having to create incentives for citizens to be more engaged, for creating, for example, water kiosks, so that this would increase collaboration. And finally, there was also safety concerns with certain armed groups making areas inaccessible.
Let's have a quick look of the theme and analysis. The first thing I like to look at is the mistrust issues. As mentioned in the interviews, this kind of mistrust relationship has been emerged between NSOs and CSOs and citizens. From the perspective of CSOs, the significant structural differences, like the working styles of NSOs, make CSOs feel really hesitant to cooperate. NSOs' mistrust towards the CSOs is basically from the quality of data. And I will introduce these issues later. And for the citizens, the lack of faith in the safeguarding of the sensitive information and the social desirability bias influences the belief of citizens. And secondly, the resource disparities issue includes mainly 4 aspects. The lack of funding is a common issue, which mentioned by all of 3 countries in the interviews, and the lack of utilized funding also needs more collaboration between NSOs and CSOs. And the second and the third issue is about the staff resources and the staff training during the data collection. Especially, and the fourth one is insufficient access and inability to using the technology, mainly mentioned in the Vietnam. Then let me talk about the vulnerable population. There is a data gap between NSO and vulnerable population, and CSOs play a role in filling that kind of gap. Because they are aiming to and have been built the stable, long-lasting relationship with the local communities. However, the NSOs, they collect data only by the specific projects. There are two examples according to our interview. The first one is Colombia, and the second one is VSOS and ELIPA from Kenya. Next is the quality issues caused by the methodology, legal frameworks, and staff training. And these factors are influencing the data quality in both three countries. So all of these issues, the mistrust, quality assurance, resource disparities, and other factors lead to the collaboration barriers between NSOs and CSOs, and the citizens and these organizations. Please.
Yeah, so to conclude, instead of just going over all of this data that we went through, we just wanted to actually outline the lessons that we learned through collecting this data, and also maybe some sort of recommendations or potential ways to overcome some of the challenges that we identified in this project. So first and foremost, building formal mechanisms to engage and CSOs and NSOs in collaboration is very important, whether that would be actually building whole programs surrounding this or allocating funding streams specifically to the collaboration, as well as citizens engagement in each governmental or CSO institution. Having mutually agreed on quality assurance standards is also a very, very big and important detail here, so that CSOs and NSOs can engage citizens and work collaboratively and actually have data that both can use in whatever ways that they would like to in the future without needing to restructure whole projects, just to kind of streamline that. Likewise, opening platforms for communication so that NSOs and CSOs can easily collaborate and actually understand who the points of contact are. So in this, we recommend potentially maybe opening online forums so that different CSOs can engage the NSO and discuss any sort of potential initiatives or areas of interest. Likewise, pilot project organization may also be really important to actually create space for NSOs and CSOs to identify areas where citizens engagement may be necessary, to identify and troubleshoot various programs and build future initiatives for collaboration. And also, of course, increasing transparency in both the methods of the NSO and CSOs can be very important, not only to build trust between the organizations, but also to build trust with citizens. Next one. And of course, we just really wanted to thank UNSD, LSE, Dr. Leone, and all of the partners that agreed to interview and were present and contributed to the discussion. And of course, I wanted to thank the wonderful group. I think that we all grew professionally and even became friends in the process. Thank you. And we'll be happy to answer any additional questions that you have.
Do you want to put the screen off if you see so stop sharing and see UNSD stuff or whatever is on the call, put it as a gallery, view gallery.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation and also the great summary for this project. And I just want to say Howie is on leave now, so she cannot join, but on behalf of UNSD, I really appreciate and I want to express my sincere gratitude for the great team for this project. I think despite a very tight timeline, and so your hard work and dedication have enabled us to gain a much better understanding of how citizen contribution to data and also for policy making. And so I just want to emphasize how this project is related to this UNSD new initiative on citizen contribution to data within the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So this, our new initiative aimed to bring together the different partners from all communities within the national data ecosystem to achieve the two main objectives. The first main objective is to fill in the critical data gaps for marginalized groups to ensure their experiences and living conditions are reflected in the monitoring of the SDGs, and also enhancing citizen participation in government decision-making, and further advance values such as fairness, inclusiveness, openness, and the transparency in statistics. And so we're very happy to let you know that the work on citizen-generated data has received a great support from the UN member states at the 54th session of the UN Statistical Commission in March this year. So the Statistical Commission really welcomes this activity on citizen-generated data and recognize the usefulness of citizen-generated data to fill data gaps and ensure the citizens' contribution to data production and better reflect of the reality of the less visible group. And the commissions also request the development conceptual framework of the citizen-generated data and establish a collaborate on citizen contribution to data, and that will provide a space to share knowledge and experience. So these projects really provide a better understanding of national practice on different types of citizen engagement in data and their potential for informing public policy and based on this 3 countries' experience. And I really truly believe such information will help the international communities understand what's the challenge we're facing and what help is needed in country. And so this contributed the further guidance to countries to help connect citizen contribution engagement to data. So really big congratulations and thanks for all the fantastic team working on this. We're really happy to work together with you through this project. I'll pass to my colleague Siqi, who closely follow with working with you on this project to have her reflections. Over to you, Siqi.
Could I ask quickly whether you think that then some of this work is going to be presented at the 2024 Statistical Committee then?
Yeah, so basically the next step is we're going to basically establish this collaborative, and what this study will be contributed to this collaborative. We will include the case studies through this project, include the collaborated, and then we will have an expert group meeting and then to working on this normative framework, and which hopefully we will present it at the Statistical Commission next year.
No, yes, thank you, Yunyi. And I also would like to add, so this report, I would first like really thank for all the partners and our team. They all did like very wonderful job. And even though the report has not really done from our UNSD side, but the LSE's team is kind enough to offer to work a little bit more on the report after actually you have submitted from the LSE side. And we'll bring this report for review among all our partners and participant countries. So this report is really gonna be a great background report to support our next steps on the collaborative initiative, as well as the framework for the citizen data. So I think it's really this project really helped us to better understand what's going on in 3 countries, which are in the very different stages of citizen engagement. So yeah, thank you so much all for working so hard on this project. And yeah, any questions to us? I saw there's our partners Lilian, Peter, and also some our Pacific countries, Victor, Lane, and also Dr. Otigan joining our presentation today. So yeah, anything you would like to add on?
I mean, I've got a few questions, and I'm going to contain myself, obviously. I thought, I mean, mainly looking at the vulnerable populations, and it was really telling the Maasai population, for example, because we did a project with UNSD on the definition of households, and now we interviewed a Maasai population, and in their concept of household, these couldn't be further away from the concept of the United Nations Statistics Division concept of household, or DHS or whatever. So I wonder actually whether we could, and this is actually asking UNSD as well, in terms of how we could push more the envelope there. Because I mean, UNSD itself, the main raison, well, not raison d'etre, but one of the key works of the UNSD is to basically provide definitions and guidelines on collection of data, on definitions of things. But the real barrier there is really kind of how you do engage more with the vulnerable populations or invisible populations or populations which do not fit the bill. So I wondered when your focus groups, whether you had kind of more solutions in there, because you touched upon it, but you didn't really push on what can be done there in terms of also the role of UNSD. And related to that, I was really interested on how the focus group worked on Zoom. I mean, how you manage that, which will be interesting in itself. And did you get the perception? So I'm going to just tell you all the questions. Did you get the perception as well in terms of UNSD? You come from UNSD, kind of, you have the mandates from UNSD, so that we kind of tell you what you want to hear. Because I mean, that's what I had when I was working for UNSD as well, that they knew there was guidelines and definitions, and so even though maybe countries weren't following some of the guidelines, they kind of felt that they had to say that. And lastly, it's more in terms of, and I wonder in terms, I know you had to go for these number of countries. It would have been great to get a francophone francophone country because of the kind of administrative setup of francophone versus anglophone versus lusophone, for example. So I wondered whether you came across that kind of administrative approach, which could be very colonial if you look at Kenya, for example, or even Vietnam, across the three countries, which then reflects in the way that there is a citizen engagement. I know lots of questions you haven't answered them all, but these were my main thoughts when you were talking.
A few questions that I can recall from what you said. I think when talking about the mandate, like we never felt that when the organizations were talking to us, we never felt that they saw us differently. Like we were just a bunch of students who were asking a few questions, were intuitions.
Which is a positive thing.
Yeah, which was very positive. Yeah. So it was very open. The conversations were very open. They were very honest, I would say. There was nothing curtailing them from saying what the actual limitations are, which we found very intuitive towards what can be improved. So especially organizations from Kenya, Colombia, but Vietnam, all of these countries, they were very open to our questions and the way they answered it. So that's one of the things that we found really advantageous to our report. We got actual answers and not something that was socially desirable to a specific population. The second thing that I would say is the vulnerable population that we were talking about. We did have really good insights from a few Kenyan organizations that we had conversations with. So we were able to understand where this comes from as well. So it was also kind of showing that certain countries where the population does not have much trust towards the government in itself. So when you show up as a part of the government, which is like a national statistics office, the people kind of curtail, they tell you the answers that they think we want and not what the actual answer is. So one way to deal with that, according to a few recommendations from a few Kenyan organizations, was to use civil society organizations. So when the people relate, or when the people communicate and relate to the people who are asking them questions, so who relate to the population, the answers are much more rich and much more honest. So having more collaboration with civil society organizations present in that particular population and location really helps. So if you guys want to add on to it, please go on.
I mean, from our side, Will and I were primarily engaged with Vietnam, and of course it is kind of a new, it's developing currently, but yeah, I would also agree with Nakshi. The conversations were really candid, they were really honest, and I think that was kind of one of the strengths of the research that we did, is that they truly captured the views of individuals. But I also did want to say that something that I found interesting about our research project is that there was almost a multi-layer, because of course we were interested in how CSOs and NSOs engage with citizens, but we were also interested in how they engage with each other. So it was actually very multidimensional to understand how all of these relationships evolved. And of course, we had about over 10 hours of footage for interviews. So unfortunately, we couldn't capture everything in the interview, but there was a lot of really good data, and hopefully we can go through it and involve more of it in the project or in the report in the future.
I think one of the things, I'm not sure if you and anyone else who's in the interview that we did with Vietnam, was that with the NSO, not only was, because the collaboration was at quite like it's, as Lisa said, nascent stages, there wasn't too much going on, but also she didn't say it directly, but I felt like a lot of what they do at the GSO in Vietnam has to go through, obviously it has to go through the government, but it has to go through the government in a way that's almost holding them back from collaborating with, for example, CSOs or NGOs, things like that. So stuff like data quality assurance, they had to always go to the media to see that, this is what they wanted, this is what the government wanted to do. So yeah, I think that was another quite a big collaboration.
It's interesting because Vietnam has got that French colonial heritage, which really, so I mean, it's almost like a master's dissertation looking at the colonial approach to data collection. So yeah, that's interesting. Sorry, one last question. Was funding.
Sorry to cut in. I saw Peter raise the hand. Maybe he has some comments on this question.
Yeah, also first of all, congratulations to you students. It was really a concise overview. This is really well done. And indeed, I just wanted to say something to Vietnam. The issue is indeed, I mean, first of all, civil society as such is not necessarily recognized as a sector by the government. And NGOs have to be organized by through a desk office that brings all the NGOs in the country together, and they have a government officer as the head of this desk office. So there is a direct relationship always to government when civil society organizations do any work in the country. So there is a certain limitation. And as such, also any possibilities to work directly together with government are restricted. But I want to also say that it's very important that this is UNSD who is involving here, because if there's any collaboration possible, it would always be on behalf or on request of a UN agency in the country. So a key, I think, a key connecting agency is on one hand UNSD to bring these actors together, but on the other hand, I think, I don't know if you mentioned that, but there's also a lot of involvement with the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, which try to link government agencies for civil society. And this will also play a big role going ahead when this toolkit is developed. Yeah, just wanted to underline that the UN also plays an important role in making this kind of collaboration possible.
Are there any other questions online? Aaron.
Yeah, it's interesting, just your comment on reflecting on the country's sort of colonial history and how that aligns to the strength or lack of strength of civil society. And I think what we've observed with Kenya, and I think with many African countries, maybe the Anglophone, I should say, is there's a very active and vibrant civil society. And so you find that those organizations care about governance, care about justice, and that's where citizen-generated data helps to close the gap. I think when you compare with Europe, for example, lots of citizen, well, this may not be purely accurate, but I think my observation is most citizen engagement is around issues of nature, because people care about, the environment and making sure that they have a good environment. While in the African context, people care about justice and about democracy. And that's where you find, lots of citizen-generated data initiatives. That said, when you compare now Kenya with another democracy or another country in the continent, then you find a country like Kenya, which has a very active civil society. There are more initiatives on CGD. There are more, efforts to really bridge that relationship between the NSO, the National Statistical Office, and the civil society. And I think that's the thing that pushes, and I think that's where you observe the changes in Kenya that, civil society have been pushing for this for, I think, 5 years, going 7 now. And it pays off eventually, but it's that consistent, persistent civil society body that helps to move that. I think in countries, and I heard this in one forum where there were NSOs in the continent, and they're saying they even struggle to talk to their civil society organizations just because that relationship doesn't exist so well. And I think that's a level of, it's a bit behind when you compare with economies or countries like Kenya, where there's that vibrant space for discussion. So, what you'll also see, and I think this is what the students were also sort of explaining, is that different levels of, I'd call them maturity, levels of maturity in terms of where CGD works best, where it's hard to, to thrive, and the reasons. But I think it gave us sort of those different contexts, in addition to what you've said, of course, in terms of just Anglo and the histories of these countries. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Just want to add a little bit on this. I think as Karen pointed out, that there's a different level of maturity in different countries on how to engage citizens and in data. So we have very good model like Kenya. The Kenya government is very open and very engaging the CSO, working side and by side with the NSO and to engage with a different community to collect the data. Then we have some other government and very conservative in using non-state data. So this is the initiative is really new. There's a lot of experience and lesson learned from many countries. So in this project, we were only able to interview 3 countries, but there are many more that in UNSD we work together with a lot of the CSOs organizations and also different countries, and also in addition some academias on citizen science data. Like this is a more popular in Europe, as Karen mentioned, they're more interested in environment related issues. So citizen science projects also used a lot in European content and also in some actually African content as well. So this is a new initiative. So we would like to, through this collaborative citizen contribution to data, to collect all this good experiences and lessons learned from different countries, and develop this conceptual framework to guide countries on how to engage citizens in data.
Festus, yeah, the question. Festus? Don't know whether I've read ones.
Thank you so much, this team, for wonderful consolidation of this kind of work. I think you add a section in the research cycles on citizen-generated data and its usefulness or its impact towards public policy or policy formulation. I think probably, and I know probably you're going to share with us your reports so that we can probably go through them and make some impetus contributions as well further. And I'm just preempting that a lot has been covered in terms of the kind of work that you guys have put in this. And probably usually and more often, the variety of approaches and methods, depending on the purpose at hand. The CGD is, it's interchangeably used with concepts like citizen science, community-driven data, participatory data, and that just represents people taking on active role in different stages of data value chain, from identifying questions to developing methods and analysis and even dissemination. And probably going further, you'd interact with some studies like the Shark et al. That tries to distinguish between the contributory factor, collaborative factor, or certain data sets that have been co-created, just depending on the extent of citizen engagement at different stages. There are also partial engagements, but all these are demand-driven, probably to speak to aspects of those that are left behind. We usually refer to the unknown voices, the silent voices, the muted voices, the unheard voices, and even those that are ignored within the public policy cycles. So very interesting, I think, how you've done that comparative analysis across the countries. But I personally am actually looking forward to physically interact with the final reporting. Probably a slight comment on one of your introductory slides pertaining to the Kenyan case. For instance, you'd have to review, I don't know how it's captured in the report, but I see in the slides it's captured that the SDGs Kenya Forum actually monitors and reviews certain 5 SDG goals. But I think probably it was either miscaptured. The 5 goals actually that you've indicated there are directly linked to the 9th session of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, what we call the RFSD 9, that was actually this year convened in Niamey. And so we actually were looking to track for the period last year, goal 6, 7, 9, 11, and 17. So you could actually recapture, because we actually track all the goals to target level and to indicator level. And we monitor and review tractions pertaining to the differentials in reporting and so on and so forth from civil society organizations. Those are my comments. But apart from that, I think this is quite a great work that you guys have put in place. And I would personally be looking forward to interact with this document and probably also share with the cycles within the Kenyan civil society organizations, but also practitioners, of which some of them I see here, Karen, Liliana, Peter, and the rest of the team that are there, including our National Statistical Office, KNBS. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I guess that we could close here, or unless there is any last comment. No. So I would like to thank Yonji.
No, I just really want to thanks again for this great work, the fantastic team and put together and working with us on behalf of UNSD. So a big congratulations. And so we continue work with you to improve the documents, and hopefully we'll use it for the collaborating.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
And the reports will definitely be shared with our partners and participant countries before we publish it.
And also from our side, I will I will talk to the group to do a blog for our website. So we will share that with you as well. And I'll be in touch for next year rounds because it's already started. So I'll be in touch with Aoi on that for the next cohort, because we're not gonna let you off the hook because we like to work with this is going to continue. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for following the group. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.